program. Before the racing starts. Is that nice Aston Martin? 4 laps. Number 7. Racing, that if I can get it, I will. drum. No trouble. Oh no, we haven't, have we? Yeah. Oh, just electric, must be electrical. Battery off? Let's see. No, I think we might have done. We might have hit the mag. Yeah, with the knee. of the Jaguar, we did the laps. That's the turbocharger coming off through the blow-off valve with the induction pipe and over to the inlet.
You on?
Yeah.
He wasn't driving in instead.
Oh, the old man one. Ian Cummins.
You went down the same time.
And that's his son, that's NZX. That's it.
What number?
20, whatever it is, the silver one behind it.
Oh, right. Go around the top. Where to set the things up.
I like to drive the post, I like to be on the other side of the post. Look at the view. Where's he going to go? You better go on the post. Back down the side of this post, Doris.
Right, is it? It's right.
Yes, right.
You want us to see?
first Jag, Martin.
That's Tony McGrath. Steve, everyone in this? Yeah, big one, this one. This is a vintage.
then, motor racing has been relegated to specially built circuits. One man who remembers well the glory and fun of racing before it became a big commercial enterprise is Arthur Collett.
Well, it was full of excitement because the very fact that the cars were racing around the streets, full chat down streets lined with shops and shop windows, emphasised the sound of the exhaust, so you had a tremendous racket going on, which was exciting in the cars and for the spectators. And also it was a challenge to drivers, which seemed to create some sort of intense interest because you couldn't make mistakes. If you hit a curb, you would turn over, even at a slow speed. So it was known amongst the aficionados that this was the classic form of racing.
Lots of detailed planning have gone into the organisation for the big event. The day before the racing is fine and warm, but overnight the clouds come in and race day dawns overcast and wet. Perhaps it's Murphy's Law. Throughout the winter, the region has suffered a crippling drought. Now, when it's too late, the skies have finally opened. For the spectators, it means finding a sheltered vantage point under one of the many wide verandas of the town's main street. For the drivers, it's a cold and uncomfortable ordeal in the open cockpit cars as practice gets underway. Practice has been scheduled for 8 a.m, and as the cars begin to move around the circuit, they set up plumes of spray from the skinny, old-fashioned wheels. For those up early enough to watch, it's the first indication of what is to come. Like the town of York, each of these finely built machines has a history of its own. If only the cars could talk. But fortunately, their owners can. Former RAAF Wing Commander Ian Borton is there with his magnificent 1937 Jaguar SS100. While its British descendants fight to compete with rival imports from Japan, this Jag had a much more dramatic fight for survival against the Japanese in wartime Singapore. Ian Borton explains what happens.
It was bought originally by a Chinese millionaire before the war, and as you know, these cars were only made before the war, and it was taken to Singapore, and when the Japanese came, they commandeered all the vehicles and gave them to a Chinese garage proprietor up there to break up the scrap, because they were running out of steel back in Japan at that time, at that stage of the war, and was in short supply. The Chinese garage proprietor, a devious old guy, he knew what old cars were about, and especially sports cars. He'd had some acquaintance with them in Brooklands in UK before the war, and he siphoned off about four of these cars that came his way, pulled them apart and wrapped them up in brown paper and buried them in his backyard, just so the Japs, so they wouldn't go into the Japanese war furnaces.
That's some jigsaw puzzle to get back together again. What happened then?
Indeed. Well, it came together after the war, and it was fairly well disguised because he didn't want the original owner to discover it was still around and sort of repossess the thing. And then an acquaintance of mine bought it back in the 60s. It was quite a mess. He got it back together in its sort of rough current shape, and I was lucky to be around with a little bit of money in my hand when he started up a business and wanted some capital, and so I bought it.
How do you go for insurance on something like this?
Oh, they don't want to know me, of course, and understandably, I suppose. You know, body panels are impossible to get for it. If you write out off those headlights, for instance, occasionally, probably once a year, there's a pair come on the market in UK, and they're advertised at £500 sterling unrestored, which means that they've had it.
What sort of value would you put on it?
Well, I suppose one, you know, when you're talking values, one could ask, how much is your wife worth? You know, if you don't want to sell, you don't consider price.
Of course, it's not just the old cars which have brought people to York for a nostalgic trip back into history. The nostalgia kick started in York more than a decade ago, as people began to realise that an important chapter of the country's past would be lost forever unless something was done. With York the focal point of the restoration activity, work soon spread to other towns, particularly in the goldfield centres. The York district was first settled in 1831 after Ensign Robert Dale discovered what was to become known as the Avon Valley. The desperate need by the fledgling colony for food had forced Governor James Stirling to range further afield from the narrow coastal plain for suitable farming land. By 1837, more than 120 hectares had been sown for cereal crops, and later, the huge selections were subdivided to attract more settlers. The 1880s, and with the gold rush to the east, York prospered. Government and officials' buildings constructed by skilled European craftsmen from beautiful stone were rapidly making York an important commercial centre. Reconstruction, many of these early buildings are still in existence today. Strangely, the flurry of interest in York's old buildings stemmed from a council order to remove many of the old shop veranda posts which had been in a sorry and dilapidated condition. Then the 1968 earthquake badly damaged many of the more solid stone buildings, and it was soon realised that something would have to be done before all was lost. Now, more than a dozen restored buildings make York a living monument to the pioneering days. Meanwhile, down in the pits area by the Avon River, tension mounts and final adjustments are made to competing cars before the main event. Motor racing is a dangerous sport, even more so in the close quarters of this type of speed classic. The organisers of the WA Sporting Car Club have spent months in negotiations with local authorities and the Road Traffic Authority to ensure that all possible safety precautions are taken. The York Flying 50 has been organised to coincide with the opening of York's latest historical attraction, the York Motor Museum. The museum is the brainchild of entrepreneur Jim Harwood and wealthy enthusiast Peter Briggs, and houses much of the Briggs collection of rare and magnificently restored classic machines. Inside the building, itself restored to former beauty, stand fine examples of marques which have long since disappeared from the roads. Lagonda of England, Hispano Suiza of Spain and Switzerland, Allard, HRG, Elvis, and Rugby. All names which bring a gleam to the eye of the enthusiast. And of course, Australia's own.
Peter, what's the reason for bringing a museum like this to York? It's a long way away from any major centre of population.
Yes, but it's also a lot cheaper, of course, to buy property in a town like York. It's much more exciting because you can restore the buildings, and you have a fair amount of individuality. You become involved with York as a town. Whereas if you say in the middle of Perth, you're just another building, another museum, another, buried in amongst all the rest of the place.
What does an event like today's race mean to a place like this?
Well, I think it's part of the nostalgia thing, which is sweeping the world generally. We believe that these sort of cars are lovely cars and that they should be seen by people. And if you can come up and drive up to a place like York, you can see York and the cars, and I think it's one of the sort of nostalgic things that are happening these days. I think it's rather exciting. We have some unique vehicles in that, for instance, this little green Aston Martin Grand Prix 1922 Aston Martin racing car inside, and that car is one of two in the world. And the only other one is in another museum that Lord Montague has in England. Of course, the big white 38 250 Mercedes is one of the original cars that was driven by Caracciola in the German Grand Prix in the 20s, and that is an extremely rare motor car. I don't know of any other in the world, but no doubt there are some somewhere. And some of the cars, the little Cooper Climax that I'm racing today, a little blue car, there's only one of those in the world, as best we know, and not that valuable, I guess, but a very unique sort of thing. And these things are disappearing fast. They don't make any more cars of that type, and therefore we think they're very valuable, but who knows how valuable. Our policy is that we want all the cars to be drivable, we want to use all the cars, and we want to eventually have the public be able to come up here and to be able to drive around the streets, or take it to eventually build a little racetrack and drive around the track, and so that the cars are always being used forever, and I don't think a car should just be looked at. It should be functional. People should be able to enjoy it and get enjoyment out of sitting in it, and kids driving them in the back and so forth. But I think cars are to be used.
By lunchtime, the rain has thankfully cleared, and the crowd begins to build up as cars stream in from Perth and other country centres. Spectators take vantage points on stone walls, footpaths, verandas, and the windows of buildings overlooking the streets. First is an event for motorcycles, some of them as rare as the four-wheeled machines they precede. The noise from the open exhaust is a deafening roar bordering on the painful as it reverberates and bounces down the narrow streets. The bikes date back to 1926 with a famous Sunbeam which won many tourist trophy races at the Isle of Man. There are others, great English names like BSA, Excelsior, Triumph and Norton. The crowds have come to see. To preserve the classic nature of the event, the entries have been limited to cars made before 1960, the days before sponsorship plastered the bodies in advertising stickers and paintwork, the days when you could see the driver at work. The organisers have paid as much attention to selecting the drivers as they have the machines. Race-dressed, and rather than an all-out speed event, it's designed to revive the spirit of the day, when the fun of competing was not clouded by commercial issues. So, the drivers have been chosen for their maturity and their ability to see the inherent dangers of round-the-houses motor racing. The crowds came for spectacle, and spectacle they saw. The Jaguar XK120s, a Model A Ford, the tiny Cooper Norton, the famous Brooklands Riley, MGs, Austin Healey's, rare Fraser-Nash machines. All the excitement of pre-war and post-war motor racing heyday. As in all true sporting events, winning isn't everything. And to emphasise that, there was no winner on Sunday, only the thrill of competition and the nostalgia of a bygone era. Receive their mementos of the event, sponsored by a major oil company. There's a general air of relief that the York Flying 50 is over, with no incidents to mar the excitement of the day. And for commentator John Rudd, it's been a day to remember.
Well, I think it was marvellous, but then I'm silly. I'm a motor racing nut and I love old cars, but it was grand stuff, grand stuff. The only way better to enjoy it would have been to compete.
Do you think, were you worried at any time that somebody might do something silly, a spectator, for example, and there might have been an accident?
One always has to worry about those things. We tried our best to warn people of the dangers because, although it's a fun thing and it's for enjoyment, motor cars do hurt when they hit you, and everybody was very aware of that. The drivers were warned before they began that they should behave like gentlemen.
And well, this was the inaugural event. Does that mean there will be more?
I hope so. The organisers hope so. I think it depends on just how much the people of York have enjoyed it, because after all, it's their town. They're the people who really have to thank.
The streets on a journey back through time, the annual Flying 50.
It's hard to say just what the Flying 50 is. The organisers point out quite clearly it's not a race, though many of the drivers seem to go through the motions of race preparation, removing silencers, fine-tuning motors and donning protective gear and helmets. The streets are blocked off and the cars and bikes race round and round a 1.7 kilometre circuit. Still, we're assured this isn't a race. But this apparently was how motor racing was born in WA. Long before multi-million-dollar investments in racing teams, long before Formula One, stock cars or drag meetings, it was all happening in the streets of towns like York. Narrogion's even been turned into a miniature Monaco for the running of the Australian Grand Prix. The drivers who descended on York today generally concede that much of the romance has gone out of motoring in what they see as the age of plastic. But they remain determined to continue closing off the streets of York just once a year and blast their way back into the past. Ross Cameron, Channel